My name is Sri Kannan. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager with the EUC Group in VMware. Joining me today is Chad Erickson, Senior Virtualization Architect from General Mills, who is going to share the General Mills VDI story, and Curtis Witt, our Technical Account Manager, a VDI sales leader. And together we'll be presenting how General Mills was successful in deploying View, virtual desktop, more specifically View, and their experiences around the deployment. Before we go into the details, a quick disclaimer. The session contains some of the product features and some details around View 5, which is going to be launched and announced tomorrow in the big EUC super session. So some of the details are still confidential, so please respect and honor that. Some of the pricing and packaging details, even though we are not going into the depth, if you have any questions, please reserve those questions till tomorrow with respect to View 5. So having said that, the today's session objectives and the agenda, at the end of this session, what we want all of you to take with you is three things. One, how View enables a modern desktop infrastructure. The VDI story from General Mills. What were their business motivations and the drivers to adopt virtual desktop over the traditional PCs? What are the lessons learned in terms of the protocol, in terms of the best practices that they were able to leverage, the automation and some of the change management that they have to go through, transitioning from the traditional PC infrastructure to a virtual desktop infrastructure. And from Curtis, we are going to hear some of the sales observations. Our sales organization and the technical account organization has the vantage point to see multiple customers deploy virtual desktop, and they have some the expertise and the perspective that they bring into the table is very valuable. So at the end of the session, we want all of you to walk away with these three main objectives. And finally, I'm going to give a quick introduction to View 5. View 5 is our new the View launch or the release that most of you might have heard or read about. A quick introduction, and specifically towards the use cases that Chad is going to talk about in terms of the outsourcing. We are going to go and we're going to talk a little bit in detail about that. So before we go into the GM's VDI story, before we look into View 5 benefits and go into the depth of it, a quick look at why are we even discussing this? Why end-user computing? Why virtual desktop? Because we have a problem. And the problem is the PC-centric problem. So what we mean by PC-centric problem is that today's PC architecture is more a hardware-centric architecture, where the users don't have the flexibility in choosing their device of choice. The applications, the way they are provisioned and being used is stuck to an hardware. There is a limited mobility in terms of where and how you can access these applications and data from a fixed desktop. And the PCs are prone to patches, security updates, yada, yada, So overall, there is a pain in terms of the downtime that the PCs go through, which has led to a very frustrating and a restricted feeling among the end users. The other side of the equation is the IT, where the IT is feeling the pain because the PC architecture is very rigid and complex. The rigid and complexity comes because there are so many components that are siloed, where even if one component fails, there is a cascading of failure across. So if you have a patch update that doesn't go through, it has a cascading effect. If the security update doesn't go through, it has a cascading effect. If you have a change control that doesn't go on time, it has a cascading effect. So there is a lot of rigidity in the back-end infrastructure that frustrates the IT organization. So what does this result in? It results in two things. One, the operating expenditure in terms of cost goes up for the IT organization. Two, in terms of the experience, in terms of the satisfaction, the ability to meet your service level agreements with your customers is degraded. So there is a pain on both sides here. One for the IT on another side for the end user. We all know the cloud is already here. The virtualization and the cloud computing is transforming the data centers and the IT in general. So how is it doing it? One, in terms of the devices available for the applications, the data, and the interaction between the users and the devices and the application. Two, advent of the private cloud. Many of the enterprises today have the virtual private cloud already deployed, and they are leveraging the benefits of the virtual private cloud. Three, many of the customers are now adopting and migrating their applications, some of the non-business critical applications, to the public cloud. The net impact of this changing computing environment is one, the apps and the data are now consumed by the users not from just one traditional PC, but from a variety of devices. When we say variety of the devices, they are mostly driven by the tablet form factors, the iPads and the Android tablets of the world. Second, the mobility in terms of accessing the same application and the data made from the smartphones, again from the tablets, or from a mobile laptop, that's changing. Three, in terms of the applications, especially software as a service, has enabled a situation where most of this application does not need any install. They can be accessed over with a browser or HTTP across many of these platforms. In terms of the virtual private cloud, the private cloud makes it seamless in terms of provisioning the same applications and the data anywhere in the data center. So the users can access the data from any of the devices, literally 24/7, with the help of a browser or with the help of an app. And this is a service which is technically 24/7. It's no longer the time where you have to plan for certain downtime for the application refresh, application upgrade, and a few other things. You now have the ability to have a 24/7 always-on infrastructure in the background. Similarly, with the public cloud, you not only reduce the cost, but you also take advantage of the benefits that the public cloud brings for the users. So the net summary of it is the computing environment with virtualization and cloud computing in general is transforming the way the users are accessing their applications and the data. All this cannot be possible if you don't keep the cost low and at the same time improve the end user experience. And towards this, how they are doing is by having an effective policy framework. The policy framework where the diverse applications, may it be in the form of a native application, a SaaS, however it is presented, you have the same experience accessing these applications. The data that is primarily served from a virtual private cloud is accessible everywhere. And when you access it, the IT has the complete control over this data. It is secure, meets all the compliance regulations, and it is always available. Third, with the different businesses going through different strains in the post-recession, there is a need to adopt different business models. So with the policy-based and a virtual desktop infrastructure, you are able to step up and meet some of these new requirements that comes into the business. So in terms of the components specific to the View, if you were to summarize this changing computing environment, if you were to take this policy framework and the way you provision these applications and data, if the way you give freedom to the users away from the PC-centric, no longer are they tied to the hardware of the PC desktop, you are actually liberating them by giving them the freedom to access the data and application from any devices. So if you were to summarize all this, what are the three components that View provides in making this happen? So going from the bottom, you have the cloud infrastructure, which is an always-on, always responsive infrastructure built on the proven vSphere platform. Then on top of that is your second layer of infrastructure where you give the control to the IT so that the security, data compliance, data integrity, and the mandatory regulations are met without additional cost or complexity. Third, in terms of the users, across verticals, irrespective of how the user accesses this application and data, you are able to give them a freedom on, you're giving them the freedom to access the data on the apps on the go from different devices, either mobile or wired, different use cases across the board. Now, specific to General Mills, how the virtual desktop enabled them in terms of what are the motivations? Why should General Mills consider virtual desktop? Are they suffering from these problems? Yes, they were suffering from the problems. Were they considering virtual desktop as a solution? Remotely, yes, which Chad will go into the details. But just to summarize, the primary drivers for virtual desktop adoption is, number one is the desktop simplification with reduction in total cost of ownership. It enables a faster deployment of both application and data. Security, especially if the data is going out of your traditional data center, like in an offshoring or an outsourcing situation, where the same data and application is accessed by the agents or developers away from your primary data center. And finally, support a new business model like bring your own device, where you can bring your own device, access the enterprise infrastructure, and be able to show the same level of productivity as before. So, having said that, I'm going to hand over the mic to Chad, who is going to walk you through the General Mills VDI story.
Good morning. That was a little loud. I'm Chad Erickson. I'm with General Mills. General Mills is a global company. We have roughly 25,000 employees and 18,000 desktops. Of those desktops, 1,200 of those are VDI, which is about 7% of our desktop population. 60% of those VDIs are actually used from overseas. Most of those are located in Mumbai, India. Our architecture highlights are we're using Vue 4.6, vSphere, and we're running full Vue VMs versus link clones. And then we're located all in Minneapolis. So really, how did we get to this 1,200 VDIs? So couple years ago, the business came to us and really said, we are hiring hundreds of employees overseas, and we need to deliver all our applications to them now. And we said, wow, what do you do with that? I mean, the data center's here, the data's here, the pipe is small. How do we do that? So we looked at VDI, and it turned out that it was very, very successful and met our needs. So we had a strong driver, we had urgency, and we had employees, which was a really good benefit for us that we were delivering to our employees, and we had a corporate network that we can control. Made things easy from the start. Now, where we're going is we've actually started hiring developers as contractors in India. So now we're outside of that corporate network, and we're just out there. So they're not our staff employees anymore. I mean, we obviously have our staff, but we've branched out. We have bring your own device. So we're going down an initiative right now where we're looking at just somebody can walk in, have their own device, and they can work. And then we have an initiative called Fuse at our main campus, where this is a flexible user space. You can just walk in and sit down, and then tomorrow you can walk in, sit somewhere else. Completely flexible. You don't have an assigned office. So some of the lessons that we've learned, really, to get to that 1,200 VDIs, we had a lot of challenges. We had a lot of hurdles that we had to overcome. So one of those things that I'd really recommend you do if you're going down this road is make sure that you have a project manager to really filter in those projects, capture the information, and then really understand the business requirements. Find out what the applications that are needed. Determine where that data is located. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to have a VDI located in your data center and the data is somewhere on the other side of the world, because then you're just making it almost worse. And then understand the technical needs. After you have that, really look at a site survey. So where are they going to be accessing from? Make sure you survey that site, get some latency and bandwidth information, and make sure that it's kind of historic. At least capture a week, 2 weeks worth of data. I mean, the more, the better. But get some information so you know, and get it at all hours of the day. It kind of fluctuates. Then look at your security and audit requirements. Some of the things that we run into is when you're looking at a different country, there's laws that actually pertain to data exiting that country. And then also with your outsource, you have audit and security requirements with that as well. You do not want your corporate data to exit out of the company. And then once you have that information, craft a solution. And then set realistic expectations to the business on really what they're doing. And that's using your business requirements from the get-go. So some more lessons that we learned regarding connectivity. There are significant WAN challenges that we ran into. We have the laws of physics. Sometimes, the time from point A to point B just isn't physically possible with the speed of light. We got carrier QoS. Make sure that you really look at that carrier QoS. So whoever your provider is, make sure you have that in place. And then look at your bandwidth. If you have a 1 meg pipe and you're trying to send 600 users down that 1 meg pipe, it's not going to happen. And then optimize your protocol, which I'll get into in the next slide. And then you have your traffic challenges. So internal. So you have your internal QoS. So you have carrier QoS, and then you have your internal QoS. Then we ran into some high packet loss rates within our wireless networks. And then you have to really decide between a VPN or a security gateway. Both are very effective. Depends on what you want to do. And then the location of your user data. You want to make sure that user data is right next to the VDI. For the protocol, you have 2 protocol options right now, PC over IP or RDP. Both are excellent protocols. I use them both. So we're using PC over IP mostly on our LAN environments. We're diving into the WAN. It's been very successful. Some great tuning highlights. I'm not going to go over all of these. However, I would definitely recommend that you write these down. I'll leave it up. But essentially, we can run this from India, 220 millisecond latency, shared pipe, and it works great. Absolutely love it. RDP is it's kind of my little back pocket little tool that I love pulling out when I don't really know what I'm getting into, right? So I know that with RDP, I can bring up to 500 millisecond latency, play around in there, and I can really push that down, say, on a pipe that I can't look at. We're really using that on our locations that we can't control their access. So, our vendors that are coming in now that aren't at a corporate office. With the tuning highlights with that, I'd really recommend that you do that bitmap cache size, and then your compression as well. So how do you deploy 1,200 full view VMs without link clones and actually manage it? I'm part of a very small team. We do server virtualization and desktop virtualization, and I think there's 5 of us total, in which me and 2 guys are the chief guys. I mean, we do View. So we really had to look at automating this. And so we brought in workflow automation, and we're using a product called Opalis. And really what we're using that for is to put in a user information, and realistically we've set a user ID and we hit go. And what Opalis does is it walks out to Virtual Center, uses the Power CLIs, deploys a VM. After that VM's done, it goes out to Virtual Center, and View adds it in, entitles the user, pulls into SCCM, goes out to SCCM, pushes all the packages out to that VM that's assigned to that user. Then takes that computer that joined to the domain, moves it into an OU that I have my group policy set in, and it moves the user in Active Directory. And then, of course, if it's using RDP, we take that user and we put it in the remote desktop users group. That way, that VM is specific to that user, and we have low security impact. And we monitor each task for completion. So what's great is somebody else can kick off this build. I get an email saying, hey, it's going. And I also get an email when it's finished or if it failed. The end user gets an email when it's done. It says, hey, your VM's done. It's ready to go. Here's how to install the VMware View Client if you don't have it. Here's how to install it if you're a vendor, if you don't have it. And also, here's how to connect. So it's essentially hands-off at that point. So we use also group policy objects. So I mentioned that we move the computer and et cetera. So really what we use group policy for is on the corporate LAN, we use that, or essentially the domain, any domain-based computers, we use that to set our view configuration. And that's our protocol tuning and our view settings. We want to make sure that every corporate device is hitting our VDI server. Why have a help desk call come in or a service desk call if they have that typed wrong? We also use that for our vendor PCs to make sure that they're locked down. Then we use essentially profile virtualization or folder redirection of My Documents right now. We're really excited to see some new things coming out to expand that folder redirection initiative. Some other things that I'd highly recommend you do is really the change management, whether that's the end users, your service desk or help desk, and then your network team, right? So your end users, you really have to set your expectations on how they can use that VDI. You don't want somebody out there running dual-screened YouTube high def from China over a 1 meg pipe. That expectation can't be met. You also want to communicate and educate kind of how everything works. I mentioned that we send off this little email to them. We tell them how to connect and everything like that. The service desk or your help desk, very important to really sit down with them, educate, and really get them on board. It's a change in support. You're going from a physical machine sitting at somebody's desk to all of a sudden having Virtual Center right there. They can do everything remotely from their desk. And sometimes it can be like, oh my, this is a change, So really get them involved and get a go-to person down there. So that one person that the rest of the analysts can go to and work with. Your network team, the network is pretty much the blood of how you're going to get to your VDI. It's very important to get them on board and really educated on what's happening with that. I mentioned earlier with the QoS, extremely important to get that in place. And then educate on the protocol. We all know that there was protocol discussions previously, which the network team is like, I definitely get them educated, do some testing, do it on your own, capture that data, and get them on board. And then, as I said, initiate those QoS discussions. Some hurdles that we're currently having. The bidirectional audio and voice over IP. Right now, it's not just simply plug and play for us. We really want to get that to boom. We're a really heavy shop on live meeting and communicator, and I'd love to have that as a stable platform. Video conferencing, we use live meeting and communicator again. We have webcams. How do we get that to a point where we can use that anywhere? And then we have decentral VDI requests. So we have one VDI here or a VDI here, and they want to access things from all over. So it's no longer accessing corporate data. It's I want this VDI to access data in France, and at the same time I want this user to access data in China. How do you do that? We're struggling with it. We got to figure out what we're going to do with that. And then we have our WAN constraints. There's nothing you can do about that minus keep monitoring and bump that pipe and get that QoS going. So latency or lack of bandwidth. And then our requirements. We sit down and we look at every single project and determine what is the best solution. Is it going to be VDI? Is it going to be RDS? Or does it mean a physical? I mentioned that we had that decentralized. Right now we're putting physical machines out in those locations. And there's a use case for each one. using that intake process. And then we also have a process hurdle that we're actually going through. And that's really the use case expands after the deployment. So we put it out there, and they're using it. It's great. And all of a sudden, we're going to do more with it. And that's a real hurdle for us on how do we rein that in. And that comes into that educate perspective that I talked about. So I guess, how did it benefit us? Well, I mean, we increased productivity right off the bat. I mean, how do you deploy hundreds of machines remotely without replicating your data center? I mean, it just wouldn't be possible. That productivity increase, I mean, the ability for us now, we can say 30 people in Denver and then 30 people in New York. I mean, you don't have to buy machines. They bring them in. They bring those people on. Okay, here you go. I can have it done in 2 hours. I mean, that's productivity increase right there. It's greater flexibility. And we have our efficiency gains with that. Enhanced reliability. When you really look at, what you can do with those VMs, they're all up to date. They are patched and compliant. When you bring all that in, you have a reduced cost. And, can you imagine what it would be to replicate all that data or bring up physical servers or physical boxes out in these remote locations or an entire data center? So we have a significant reduced cost, and we have great flexibility on just spinning them up, tearing them down, bringing up more people. I'm going to hand this off to Curtis, and he can kind of give you his view of some things that he's learned.
Am I on? Excellent. Thanks, Chad. That's a great synopsis of where things have been and where they're headed with regards to VDI at General Mills. So as Sri mentioned earlier, I'm Curtis Witt. I'm a technical account manager in the Minneapolis, Minnesota area. And being a technical account manager, I go out every day into the field and help my customers with giant binoculars, as you can see. So no, not really, but what I do as a TAM is I work with a number of very large VMware customers. So that gives me a unique opportunity to see multiple VDI initiatives in action. And I start to notice that the customers approach things in pretty different ways, right? And the approach that you take might lead to success, or it might make you stall out or even fail to get started on VDI. So I'd like to talk about just some observations that I see, things that I think might help you succeed in your environment. Of course, your mileage may vary, but I think these are tips that are definitely helpful. So first up, eat your VDI elephant one bite at a time. Chad talked about use cases, right? I think almost every customer that's considering VDI has probably a number of solutions that might, or a number of use cases rather, that might be solved by a VDI solution. You've got folks on the WAN, folks on the LAN. You probably have users that range from task workers to productivity workers to developers, maybe even graphic artists, right? And those use cases each have pretty dramatically different requirements and restrictions. So there definitely is not one size fits all, as Chad alluded to. So don't attack this like there's a VDI solution for your company. Take each use case in mind and design what's appropriate for it. So my recommendation is to start where you can succeed. So who remembers back to the early days of server virtualization? Did anybody go out and virtualize your tier 1 production mission critical applications first? Show of hands. Did it go well? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, most people didn't start like that, right? We started off with the easier stuff. Maybe it was smaller workloads, things that had less risk with them, things that were maybe less technically complex. And I recommend doing the same thing with VDI. Now, maybe you don't have that choice, right? Chad talked about General Mills, and they kind of got a real hard problem thrown at them right away, and luckily they're able to move through it. But if you've got the ability to pick your battles, start where you can succeed. Definitely makes a big difference. So besides just building confidence with your business unit that's going to use this solution, you get the benefit of your team being able to educate themselves, get comfortable with the technology, and grow into the technology so they can start to tackle some of those harder use cases as you move on. So plan for growth, right? I mean, it will happen. I've seen this time and time again, particularly if you start where you can succeed, right? That good news travels fast. Business units want to get their hands on this new VDI thing, and you need to be prepared for growth. So how do I prepare, right? How do you get ready for this? Well, I'm not talking about going out and buying hardware ahead of time necessarily. I'm talking about thinking about your next order of magnitude of deployment. So if today's effort is a 50 or 100 person POC, start thinking about how you might scale that. How would you take that to 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 users? It'll have dramatic impacts on your virtualization infrastructure, your networks, your storage environment, possibly your security team, your access methods, your help desk. Think about all of those things and get those people involved and make sure you plan ahead so that when that growth does happen, you're not caught by surprise. It's kind of interesting because with the high densities you see in VDI, it's pretty easy to start jamming more and more and more VMs in and not necessarily be prepared to manage that or have them perform properly. So next up, form a virtualization center of excellence. You heard Chad mention a little bit that they've got one team that tackles everything virtualization at General Mills. Now, you don't necessarily have to change the org chart at your organization, but one of the things you can do is get more people involved. Chad talked about the importance of getting the network team involved, right? Make sure they understand this as you're building it. Get them involved early. So I would extend that to say, not just the network teams, get your storage teams, get your security teams, your help desk teams, the desktop and VI teams speaking together. Because what I've seen is that in siloed organizations, you really end up with this thing that's sort of thrown over the fence, end up with a lot of finger pointing. You can get a lot of confusion, a lot of delay when you're trying to troubleshoot problems. So if you get those people talking early and get them talking regularly, things definitely work out better. One thing that's interesting to note, a lot of you that are going to think about tackling VDI, you probably have a pretty good VI team in place already, right? You maybe made some good progress in server virtualization. You got pretty good command of that tool set. And that's good. And I'd say it's probably table stakes to start doing VDI. But what you need to know is that the challenges of VDI are definitely very different from those in server virtualization. You're more likely to see boot storms when everybody comes in and logs into their VM. There's a different network connectivity model. You've got a lot of machines that now suddenly need access to things beyond the core network in your environment. Let's not forget there's people at the end of these VMs, right? I mean, your server VMs are out there, they're chugging along, they're doing their work all day, but they don't complain. They don't call the help desk. Keep that in mind. It's definitely a different environment. Chad mentioned this a little bit, but establish some remote site champions. And I think this is really important for the long haul, right? I would do this for any remote site, domestically or internationally, but particularly for the long haul, you want to have some hands and eyes and ears at that remote site to give you good, consistent, objective feedback about performance. So one of the first things that almost everybody does when you're thinking about VDI over the long haul is set up your WAN emulator, right? Everybody's got this magic cable somewhere that you plug into, and this is the India cable, or this is the Russia cable, or whatever, right, to try to simulate those network conditions. So if you've done this, you probably learned that they're not incredibly accurate. They don't characterize what actually happens in your wide area network, and that's why Chad was saying, take a look at your network, right? Understand what you really face day to day, understand the characteristics of it, work with your carrier for quality of service. You can, so you can't control the speed of light, but you might be able to control your link quality, for example, and it's important to get that real feedback from the field of the people that are using it. Optimize your OS images. You've probably seen this before, but I'll mention it again. Please, please, please don't go and grab whatever image you use to build your physical desktops, P to V that thing, and then step on the gas pedal. You're going to fail. I guarantee you that. That OS has been built for these physical PCs. It's burdened with physical drivers and all kinds of things from a bygone era. So start fresh, right? We've got optimization guides published for both Windows XP and Windows 7. They walk you through some of the best practices of how to prepare that OS to make a good, suitable starting point for VDI. So again, there's best practices. I think we've got some scripts actually for Windows 7 at least, possibly Windows XP, that help you modify some of the policy settings. And this probably isn't your final product, right? I'm not here to tell you that you're going to go through this and just deploy it. You're going to definitely have changes in your organization, but this is a good baseline to start from, so make sure you consider that. Rethink your antivirus and endpoint. So this is kind of an interesting one. VDI introduces challenges that you may not see in a distributed physical environment. What happens if all 500 or 5,000 of your VMs kick off their daily scan at the same time? It can have an absolutely crushing effect on your virtual infrastructure, your network, your storage. It's definitely going to yield bad user experience, I can promise that. So the good news on this is that even most traditional antivirus programs have an ability to randomize this, right? Take that I/O and kind of scatter it across the the course of your workday. But beyond that, I'd consider taking a look at solutions that are based on vShield Endpoint. And if you're not familiar with vShield Endpoint, it does some really innovative things of taking that antivirus processing out of the VM, moving it towards a centralized appliance. So there's an obvious benefit here of not having thousands of antivirus engines running at once, right? So there's some efficiency gain that you get out of the environment just from that alone. Another nice benefit is you've now got one central place to manage this stuff, one set of DAT files to update. So it definitely simplifies your life. And an interesting side effect of this is it's actually more secure because you take the protection engine out of the actual environment that it's protecting, and that it reduces that as an attack vector. So lastly, stay current. So anybody in here been around since VDI was called VDM? Impressive. That's actually more hands than I expected to see. Anybody here still running VDM? Okay, thank goodness. If you're just embarrassed, raise your hand because you've still got it. That stands for Virtual Desktop Manager. If that's still your solution, you need to move on. Okay, so a lot of things have changed in the last couple of years. Our products at VMware, and I'd argue even the entire industry, is changing really rapidly. So within VMware specifically, we've seen pretty dramatic improvements to the tools that you use to manage and administer View. They're definitely better performing and easier to use these days. We've also seen an addition of a new protocol, so PCIP is there, and improvements to that protocol. We've also seen some technologies that allow you to drastically reduce the amount of storage that your desktops consume by using link clones. We've seen thin app entitlement integration, so a lot of things are happening. Make sure you stay current with this stuff. So those are really just the things I'd like to have you consider. And don't worry about writing this stuff down. You guys can get these slides after the conference electronically. But I've had the pleasure of working with Chad and the team at General Mills for it's almost 3 years now. So it's been quite a long ride, and I've seen these guys either adhere to these guidelines or in some cases even be the model for them, right? And I think that's repeatable. I think you can take these back to your organization and definitely increase your chances of success. So that said, I'd like to turn it back to Sri. He's going to talk a little bit about what's coming up with the future of View at VMware. Thanks.
Thank you, Curtis. Thank you, Chad. Thank you both. That was very insightful. So going back, before we go any further, let me just summarize what Chad was saying in terms of the hurdles. There are two categories of hurdles that he mentioned. The first category is he wants voice. He wants rich media. He wants video conferencing. And second thing, he is hurt by the network characteristics, may it be the latency, may it be the bandwidth issues, and some of the associated pain that he's going through. And let me tell you, Chad was being nice when he was putting that slide for VMware. I mean, when he talks to us, he's a little tough. So just to take care of Chad and few other customers who are like him. So View 5, the use case, again, if you look at Chad's primary use case, it was more towards enabling some of the outsourcing or the outsourced employees out in India and ability to come on board at a very short period of time, like a few weeks, I think, he had in terms of making them enable. And then he cannot duplicate his resources. He cannot build a data center out there and give them all the access. And at the same time, he wants to move away from the pain that the traditional PCs are suffering from. So just to summarize what we heard before we go any further into View 5, what we are essentially telling, the four key benefits that we have highlighted as one, with View, he was able to provision a simplified desktop. Like the example that he gave of bring your own device, may it be a Mac, may it be a PC, or probably even a tablet form factor of an iPad or an Android client. The desktop was simplified where the users can bring their own device and be able to access the same infrastructure and leverage all the benefits in a short period of time. The second is security. Now, he is giving access to third-party employees out somewhere 18,000 miles away in India, and he has to care about the security and the data integrity and all that. He was able to achieve that with the VDI. The third, he wants to give the same level of application access to some of the popular applications that they use, primarily the Oracle applications or the CRM applications and a lot of applications that are accessed over the browser. He has to give the same level of access, make it easier for them to access it, and at the same time, he cannot duplicate these resources remotely. Lastly, he has to manage all this in a streamlined managed way of doing it. And lastly, he has to do it without raising the cost. So General Mills and definitely Chad is happy in terms of achieving these things. So we are not stopping. We are extending the benefits of this with View 5. So going back, the 2 pain points around voice and video enablement, which translates to an user experience, ability to have a rich multimedia experience for the users, ability to provide and ability to deploy and provide the virtual desktop across a variety of networks, LAN and WAN, and at the same time, reducing the total cost of ownership. Your cost of ownership should not increase release upon release. So how do we that's a primary motive. That's a primary benefit that we are delivering to General Mills and a lot of other customers. So there are 3 broad categories in which we are focusing the View 5 benefits. Number 1 is the user freedom. Again, going back to the PC-centric problem, we are liberating the users from the pains of the traditional PC in terms of the overall provisioning, the management, all the other things that Chad talked about. The users get to feel more freedom from the devices. They can access the same View desktop from different variety of devices. The clients that we support, the number of clients that we support is growing. The more number of devices are getting added in terms of the support. You have increased flexibility, and the desktop availability is being increased. The IT control, again, with respect to the compliance, the way you manage the data and the security, and the cost associated with it in managing, we have further reduced about 50% total reduction in the cost. And all this, we have done this with a tight integration with the vSphere platform. The vSphere 5, which is going to be announced as part of the VMworld, the entire infrastructure of View 5, there is a tight integration with vSphere. So vSphere being a best-in-class cloud infrastructure, you can expect an always-on, always-responsive infrastructure that meets your VDI requirement. So more specifically, now going back to the use case of the outsourcing, what are the exciting features that you're going to see in View 5? So the 2 main categories that Chad talked about. One is the user experience the overall user experience and the freedom for the users. And the second is how do you deal with the network effect on the virtual desktop. So this is a snapshot of 3 features that are more relevant in an outsourcing industry. The first one is the improvement to the PC over IP. The protocol has been optimized to consume up to 75% less bandwidth than what it used to be. Second, the build to lossless experience. The performance has been greatly enhanced. The third, some of the outsourcing, if there are in the audience, if there are folks from the outsourcing industry, you would remember the call agents or the call center agents who are accessing the desktop remotely. If the desktop were to be reconnected, getting back is going to take a finite amount of time, and it has a manual process involved in it. With View 5, with the PC over IP enhancement, this is going away. There is an automatic reconnect that is being implemented. So they don't have to do any manually, they don't have to do anything, and the desktop will be automatically available. The second, going to the support of the rich media applications, mainly the voice and video. We have the API available now where the key vendors, the top vendors like Cisco and Avaya, can integrate their soft phones, the voice over IP soft phones, with the existing call manager infrastructure that's already there. They can integrate those soft phones into the virtual desktop. So with View 5, you will have a single integrated desktop where you can plug in a microphone and a headset, and you will be able to make and receive calls with View 5. So that's again goes back to ability to give the users freedom in terms of not having to manage 2 or 3 devices, mainly, especially in a call center type environment where the users have a desk phone and a desktop, and they have to log in on a separate interactive voice response system, and then separate desktop with applications. They go through, the call center agents go through all kind of pain in terms of logging in, logging out, and all that, which has been, it's going to be a much more pleasant experience for them with an integrated desktop like this. The third is the persona management. The persona management improvements mainly is around faster logon times, ability to support the single sign-on devices, and the integration with some of the workforce optimization software, where the profiles and other things, you don't have multiple profiles to manage, you don't have multiple personas that needs to be managed at the IT level. Now with the persona management features, you can integrate them, and that gives more freedom to the users. So focusing specifically on the outsourcing, View 5 is a business process desktop in many ways. The key features that are coming in View 5 squarely addresses some of the core features that is required in a business process, in the business process industry. So View 5 can be seen as a business process desktop, where it provides an integrated and a flexible solution primarily to manage many of the call center or the contact center agents. And the BPO industry is very cost-conscious industry. With vSphere 5 and View 5, we are able to further reduce the total cost of ownership, thereby giving them the cost benefit completely. The industry has come to see VMware as a number one in many of the things that we have released. So across the last decade, you can see that VMware has been first in many of them. And even with View 5 and vSphere, we continue to bring out some of the solutions in the market which are innovative, which are the number one which is the first in the market. So in this case, with View 5, the UC is first in the market with partnership with the key vendors. It's not like we are opening up the APIs and anybody can integrate with it. We are working closely with some of the top vendors like Cisco, Avaya, Mitel, and few other vendors, where we are doing some cross-validation, where the vendors are giving us a thumbs up, saying, okay, this is the right way to do it. And the quality, performance, and everything is assured in the process. So we have several references in the BPO industry today who have already taken advantage of the View 4, like Chad. With View 5 coming in with the integrated desktop, we are going to see more customers, more marquee customers or the top customers added to the list. So the list is just a short list of BPO customers who are successful, very similar to General Mills. Having said that, the key takeaways that we want our audience to walk away with today is View enables the modern desktop infrastructure. You can move away from the pains of the traditional PCs with the View infrastructure. The View 5 that we are sharing, the launch is going to happen in a short frame of time, and you're going to see more announcements coming in the VM world. Extends the leadership in the VDI market for us. Story from the General Mills VDI story. Adopting a planned and a phased deployment enables you for success. And it also enables you to accommodate some of the future requirements that you're going to see in the next couple of years. Leverage the VMware account team, their expertise, their perspective, and the deployment stories and the best practices that they have is definitely valuable when you adopt the VDI as part of your desktop infrastructure solution. Finally, the release upon release, View 5 also reduces cost. The key benefit that we give to the customers is a reduced total cost of ownership. So there are several resources available online. You don't have to take it down. This is going to be available in the slide deck. Take advantage of these resources available. With that, thank you so much for the opportunity to present for us. We can have a short Q&A session. The only request is please keep the questions of the Q&A more specific to General Mills, because we want to take advantage of Chad's presence here. The View 5 questions, there are going to be deep dive sessions, and there's a super session tomorrow. A lot of the questions, a lot of the information will be shared there. So if you have any questions, we would like to answer them. Thank you.
Works all right. Oh, no.